Welcome to session 6 of Classic Metal Class. I've got my friend and special guest, Scott Tarulli, here with me, as always, and we're going to be talking about ethical issues having to do with farewell tours and what I think we should probably call post-farewell tours, that is, tours beyond the original farewell tour. Is there an ethical issue or set of issues there? I think that there is, and one of the people who has been most vocal and I would say consistent about this is Dee Snider of Twisted Sister. Twisted Sister themselves did a farewell tour, and Snyder said, "This is it. We're not doing any comebacks after this." And he's had some harsh words to say about bands that have come back from that. So we're going to look at some of the things that he has to say, because he's not just grousing about it. There are some serious, well thought out claims that he's making. He has some arguments that pertain to ethics. They're not articulated in terms of academic treatments of ethics, but I think they hit at a core level. And I think part of this will help us get to a bigger topic that we might approach later on, which is what is the relationship between the band and the audience, the fans? You know, this is a perennial issue. Is it sort of just, well, the band is just, there, and then the audience, they're the appreciators, and the band gets to do whatever the hell they want? I don't think so. I mean, there are some bands who behave that way, but I think that there's arguably, especially when we're talking over decades of supporting the band and playing their music and championing them with other people, there's a kind of relationship that builds up. And it's paradoxical, because obviously you're a player in a major heavy metal band. You can't engage every single audience member, right, and answer every bit of fan mail that comes to you. That's just impossible, right? But there's something. You can't just brush people off either, or say, well, you're just dollar signs to me. So there's that bigger issue in the background, but then we're going to consider a lot of arguments for and against doing tours past the original tour, and we're going to look at some interesting examples, and I've got some quips and quotes here from people, but I've already talked a little bit. Let Scott get in here and give some of his thoughts about post farewell tour. Obviously not an issue for us, right? Because we're still pretty young,
right?
And we're not going on tour right now anyway. But I mean, would you ever consider doing? Let's say you were a music, in a super group, right? And you got all these people who you put together, and let's say you're the band leader, and you're like, I really want to have this band, and it's a super group that works. And then, yeah, and then people get I don't know, tired of it or sick, and you're like, yeah, we do need to hang it up. I got to get to some other projects. You do a farewell tour, you announce it, everybody's showing up. They're like, we love you, come back again. Would you ever consider coming out of retirement and putting the band back together and going back on tour?
No, I mean, I think in the first place, I wouldn't, unless there were dire circumstances with somebody in the band, I would never announce a farewell tour. I'd probably do the tour, and then you don't do it again. The second you announce a farewell tour, you're essentially making a verbal contract with your fans,
okay,
right? Because now if I say farewell tour, I could jack the prices of my tickets up. I could jack the merch prices up, and I can have exclusive merch. You can have this, and with eBay, people might buy up 10 of these T-shirts and say, I'm going to keep one and sell 9 for triple the price. So now you've got money coming in. So just the farewell bit, and Kiss is an example of somebody that would do that. For better, for worse. But
you'd never imagine they would.
But once you announce a farewell, like this is it. If I did that, I wouldn't come out of retirement with the band. I'd still make music in other forms. Maybe I'd form a new band, unless it was like I'm retiring, which is a whole different thing. But I think being on both sides of the coin with this, it's kind of
Yeah.
like, as a fan, I would say, well, wait a minute. We had talked about this before. It's like I canceled two, big paying gigs to drive all the way to New York City to see this. It cost me this much in gas. I had to sit in traffic, and I would have never done it if you didn't say it was a farewell tour. For you coming back,
Yeah.
it was just kind of like, yeah. But anyways, to answer your question, no, I wouldn't even announce a farewell tour, because that, to me, that would just be like taking advantage of, now we can ask whatever we want for ticket prices because the diehards are going to pay whatever. They're going to get the exclusive merch, and then
Yeah.
you make them feel like, what did you get? Dollar signs.
Yeah. So it's a reduction of the fan, which is a different kind of relationship, to a purely monetary relationship, or a relationship which perhaps isn't simply monetary, but one where the fan is there to be the person to make the musicians look like big shots. You can pack a hall that maybe you couldn't do if it wasn't a farewell tour.
Well, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And what are you offering the fan in the farewell tour? Well, like some people might say, we're going to play 3 songs from every album.
That's
Or
an interesting one. So one of the farewell tours that I was going to talk about on this, and that you and I have talked about before, was Judas Priest's Epitaph tour, which Andy and I were fortunate enough to get to see in Reading, Pennsylvania. And they did a retrospective, and they've done this subsequently with tours that we've seen them on after that, because it wasn't really their farewell tour, as it turned out. But there was this like, well, we did this at this time, and here's part of the story, and then we did this album, and this song is off of it. And it was really something. It was a great way to organize the songs thematically, you could say, right? So I think you might be frozen there, Scott. Can you hear me on your end?
yeah, I didn't. You cut out. You froze.
Okay.
Frozen?
Yeah, so I was saying that on the Epitaph tour, they did this great retrospective, and they covered all of these interesting pieces, some deep cuts, stories for each of the songs that they were doing. Oh, so they launched into a few without doing stories, but mostly it was a large kind of this is our big end. We want to, as fans, this is here for you. We want you to appreciate the whole catalog, and it made a lot of sense too, because there were a lot of younger kids out there in the audience who were there with their parents.
Right. Well, that's interesting too. Yeah. Having the
generational issue, right?
The generations. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So let's jump into some of the issues and ideas. So if it's a farewell tour, at first it seems like a kind of a no-brainer, right? You shouldn't be calling it a farewell tour if you don't intend it as a farewell tour. And if you think about it, they're not like making this decision in the back of the tour bus, like, well, let's just call this the farewell tour. It's planned out well in advance. They know what they're doing. So there's deliberate decision making going on there. And then they promote it as such, as you pointed out, which then comes with certain kind of ethical obligations, I would say. They create all sorts of expectations on the parts of the fans and other people. And, if we look at some of the most egregious examples, Ozzy did a No More Tours back in 1992. And that was No More Tours 1. And then No More Tours 2 is started in 2018, and it's ongoing. Is it really the last of Ozzy? We'll see. Kiss did their farewell tour in 2000 and 2001. And then they did the End of the Road tour, which is still ongoing. Right? The Scorpions did a farewell tour back in the early 2010s. Motley Crue did their final tour from 2014 to 2016, and then and in that criticized Kiss for doing extra farewell tours and said, we're actually going to have an agreement. We're not going to do any more tours. Motley Crue's back on tour. And then, we talked about Judas Priest. They had to do they had to, retract their statements about the Epitaph tour. I think there's some, we're going to get into like some of the reasons why maybe you could in fact do another tour having to do with illness, which I think also pertains to the Ozzy things as well. But the big issue here is it okay for bands, not just in a legal sense, but in an ethical sense, to go back on tour? What would make it okay for them to do so? So here's the thing from Vinny Appice, who people know from Black Sabbath and so many other great things where he's been this studio and touring musician. He says, I've heard a lot of farewell tour announcements, then you find out they're still touring, not Kiss, but other bands. I think the Scorpions were doing a retirement tour 10 years ago. Sometimes it's the time to give it up and actually retire, because after doing it for so many years, I think with Kiss, it's easy because you could probably continue with a great show. With just a Kiss show, they're not even in it, and an amazing show with all these theatrics and all the effects and great music. But it's cool that they announce it, and if it's true, everyone go check it out for one last time. And then he says something else that's, I think, really telling. And this is a point you've brought up before in other things. I don't think anyone thought this music was going to last this long. Back in the 70s, they probably thought the music was going to last 10 years or something. I don't think anybody thought these bands were going to last so long 40 years later or more. So it's kind of sad the bands are going away, but that's bound to happen. These are unforeseen circumstances that come about because of the success of heavy metal as a genre and the fact that bands were able to continue to go on tour, right? So, the Kiss thing we talked about, you and me privately, but we should probably let people in on this. There are plans apparently in the works for Kiss to become a franchise. And now in your view, that means they become purely a tribute band, right?
Yeah, that you're putting not Kiss on the road.
Yeah, so would people show up for it? I mean, Vinny Appice is saying it's going to be a great show because it's going to be let's call it a Kiss TM show, right? Where Kiss now becomes a kind of, what should we call it? A genre of music. Kiss becomes a style. I don't know. How should we mark it in that case? A franchise?
I mean, that's it. I mean, I guess it's a matter of opinion, because people locally will go see tribute acts that have no connection with the real band. Like I always talk about, there's a band around here called Dirty Deeds, and they can play once a week and pack the house, and they're trying to look like AC/DC, trying to sound like. Now, I don't quite understand, if you don't have Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons, you don't have Kiss. You could try to find an imitator, but the tickets, if they were like $10 or $15, maybe I'd go for fun. But they're not going to be $10 or $15 because the band needs to make money, the crew needs to make money, and of course Paul and Gene are going to take a cut. Live Nation's going to take a cut. So you're looking at $300-$400 tickets, maybe. I mean, that's just a projection. Think of all the hands that are in the pot.
Yeah,
and everybody needs to get paid. Unless these people are so desperate to be in the band that they're willing to work for $100 a night just to, say they're in Kiss. But that's another ethical issue.
Yeah, as we were talking about this a couple days ago, I was pointing out that Tommy Thayer and Eric Carr, who've been with the band for a long time, as replacements for and playing the parts of Ace Frehley and Peter Criss, would in effect become the senior members of the band, whatever hired guns they brought in to put on the makeup. We were also talking as well about the difficulty. It's one thing to play somebody who's just a, say, rhythm guitarist and doesn't have any singing roles or anything like that, and doesn't have to wear grease paint. It's a whole nother thing to sing with Gene Simmons' voice, do his bass lines, and put on all that makeup and stage stuff, or to do Paul Stanley. So,
and I was going to say, not to interrupt, but a point just from the musician side. You're going to take somebody that plays music, and they're going to transform so they're going to dedicate their lives to imitating somebody else. Now, I could never picture that. Like, I personally could never join a tribute band because Now you've given up your identity totally. And so it's kind of an interesting thing to see how they hold up after maybe thinking this new guy is Paul Stanley.
Yeah.
And, from people's level, is it worth the money to, I mean, for a lot of people, most people don't share my opinion on it, but did they get into music to completely imitate somebody else to the point where it's like, what is it? Jim Carrey trying to be Andy Kaufman. I mean,
Yeah.
method acting. So the whole shooting. Oh, did we freeze?
No, I can still see you and hear you on my end. Yeah, we're having some internet issues, I think. So let's while we're on this brief digression before we get back into the discussion of the ethical, implications of going back on tour. Let's take Mark's point here. I don't think many bands should follow KISS in this move, but I'm glad KISS is doing it, if only to see what happens with the franchise, how it plays out as an experiment. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Sometimes it's interesting to be able to see whether it could be pulled off, whether it would be any good. Maybe they do it and people are like, this is not KISS. I don't want to hear this, right? On the other hand, it does also, so this is something we're going to talk about a little bit later, it does also hit on something that's of value to fans, which is the chance to get to hear that band again. One reason why I think some fans might be like, I don't care how many farewell tours they do, I'm going to go to all of them, would be, well, I want to get to see this band live, right? And let's get in as many performances before they're all too old and die off. So there's something to that, but I don't know if that would really apply to a complete franchise band. Like Scott was saying, you're not really going to see KISS when you're going to see a lineup of people who have spent a lot of time with KISS, like Tommy Thayer, but they're not KISS without the key component players, maybe.
And the ticket prices are going to be KISS prices, and
right.
Probably more.
Yeah.
They're going to be more. I mean, like I said, if it's $15-$20, it might be a fun show to see. But for me, it's hard to take it seriously. I don't know. Is that alone ethical? I mean, when do you just let the band be part of history? That's what we make records for. They're snapshots of the time. So 1975, 1977, the Crazy Nights era, and they have documentation of all of these. Why can't we just, watch the DVDs, listen to the records, because it's gone. I mean, Paul can't sing like he used to, and that's just a fact of life. And it'll be permanized by recordings and permanized by video for forever. And
that is a really interesting point. Maybe there's something on the fans' part that's too demanding, that we need to have live performances of bands. We're sort of demanding that they continue well into their 70s to gratify us.
But there's more bands than KISS. It's not like live music is dead because KISS retired. Right. So that's another issue. And I never got to see Thin Lizzy. Like the original lineup. Yeah. I would love to, but I don't want to see, hey, here's a great Thin Lizzy tribute band. Here, pay $250 and you're seeing Thin Lizzy. Well, no, I'm not, because I was born in the wrong time, or I would have loved to see Elvis, be at the 68 special, but I wasn't born yet. So
yeah, or for us to have seen like UFO with Michael Schenker.
Oh, well, 1970.
We were in grade school, so.
And for them to go, we're going to get a Michael Schenker sound alike, and you could go see. No, it's the era's gone. We missed it. You can see Cheap Trick, but you can't see Cheap Trick 1978 anymore, because that's gone, and that's a fact of life, I think.
Yeah. So this is a good point to move on to another little snippet. So in 2015, Motley Crue was interviewed, and they were interviewed about Kiss. And so Vince Neil said, Kiss had 5 farewell tours and 4 reunion tours. That's exactly what we don't want to do. He says that was the whole reason we wanted to go out on top with people saying, yeah, man, I saw the last concert. It was awesome. We don't want to be that band where it's billed as Motley Crue and maybe one original member's brother left in the band and they're playing clubs. If we let that happen, we wouldn't be thought of or remembered like we want to be. Now, that is a good lead into some of the things that Dee Snider had to say, because Dee Snider originally talked about how Motley Crue had gone out that way and Twisted Sister had gone out that way. And then he said, so this is the Blabbermouth interview of 2017. He said, I'm one of those people who express great frustration at these bands who retire and then come back. I think it's an insult to the fan, especially when you pay a premium for these shows. A premium for the No More Tours shirt by Ozzy Osbourne. How many years ago was that? Come on, seriously. The Kiss farewell tour, farewell to Ace and Peter, I guess. I think that's insulting. Scorpions did a 3-year farewell tour and changed their mind. Then he goes on and he says, I don't want them to leave, but if you're going to announce that you are and tell us that, then you're supposed to leave. So that's a key point. You're supposed to leave. Feel free to stay forever, but don't do a 3-year farewell tour and then change your mind the next day. Not cool. Me and the Twisted guys, we are of the mind, just like Motley Crue.
Oh, no.
This really is it, and we're done. I have no intention of going back. I don't want to be one of those people who go back on their word, and I hope if I do, the audience tars and feathers me and says, you know what? You're worse than the people who faked it. You made a big deal, made a stink, pointing fingers at everybody, and then you came back. I don't want to be that guy that people look up there and go, God, he used to be so good. I never want people to feel that way. So there's a lot of points there that he's
That's
making.
a great
right?
point. Yeah. Oh, that's such a great point.
So now in 2020, he gave an Ultimate Guitar interview. And he says, they asked him, we've seen a few important bands coming out of their retirement for a new tour, such as Motley Crue. What are your thoughts on this current trend? Dee, ever the diplomat, said, I think it's bullshit. When you say farewell, Rage Against the Machine breaks up. That's not retirement. They broke up and they reformed, and that's great. But when you do a farewell tour and you announce this and you sell tickets and you have a T-shirt that says no more tours, thank you very much, Ozzy, I bought one of those, and then you come back, that's bullshit. So when you say we're retiring, here's a key point, people now don't take it seriously. So it's like a joke, and I think part of it is that these artists have nothing else going on, and I realize that without playing, they have no career. So Motley Crue, in the past, they were on the same page as Dee Snider, but Dee Snider and Twisted Sister hasn't come out of retirement. Motley Crue did, and Dee Snider is saying that is the ethically wrong thing to do. So,
Well,
go ahead.
He brings up a really good point for the fans that we should think about ethically too. Dee Snider made a point in there that I really liked, that he said, he felt the top of his game.
Yes.
And he didn't want to, wait for 15 years till, I saw Black Sabbath 10 years ago on Ozfest, and Ozzy, I thought he was a corpse. He wasn't nearly in tune. He wasn't moving, and he just kept saying his key lines, "We love you," and that was sad. That was a sad day for me. It was just, you shouldn't have done this. Like, I wanted to remember you.
Yeah.
I think that's ethically, I don't know. I mean, you could perform as long as you want, I guess, but like the last Kiss tour, the one was going on. I mean, Paul Stanley was using tracks. He got caught using tracks. And he couldn't sing. I mean, he's a fantastic, legendary frontman singer.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's past. And I think one of the Dee Snider's point is go out on top. It doesn't mean you can't do music. Look at Robert Plant. He didn't want to do the Zeppelin reunion, but he did this great record. And when I went to see him, he did the new record and some Zeppelin 3 stuff that pertains to him in his 70s. I think he's in his 70s. And I'm sorry, but go on. There's a lot of great points in there. You were going to get to some.
Well, Dee Snider talks specifically about that in another interview, in the Metal Hammer interview in 2016, where he was talking about why they were ending Twisted Sister tours. He said, when AJ passed away, it was like, okay, now we're losing members. Not that anyone else is planning on dying anytime soon, but AJ wasn't planning on dying either. I said to the other guys, are we going to be one of those bands where members start falling away and then there's only one original member in the band or two different versions of the band touring with different lineups? Everyone said, well, we take your point now. Without all five of us, it does seem odd. So maybe it's the time to announce that we're calling it a day. So that's one set of reasons, right? Age, dying off, avoiding you could call it cheapening of the band name by all these acrimonious splits. And then he said something else, and he said this in other interviews too. I've endeavored to stay in the kind of physical shape that enables me to perform as the Dee Snider that people know and love, and that's another reason for us to bow out. I don't know how long I can keep this up. I'm still delivering, and I don't know whether to thank my lifestyle or the gods above, because we all know Dee Snider is very gym-oriented, right? But no one can beat gravity, and I don't want to lose it on stage. So he's saying, I don't want to be one of those guys who shuffles out and not only isn't mentally, but just doesn't have the physical chops. And he said in another interview that I wasn't able to find, but I remember reading this, I'm cool with going on and being Dee Snider and doing other metal stuff, maybe in another band, but we're not going to do Twisted Sister because I can't do the stage antics, running around on stage. I can't continue. I can do it now. I can't guarantee that I'll be able to keep doing it. And so I think it's unfair to the fans to just keep going on like that, you know?
Well, that's a good point. I mean, if you really break it down, if you really think about the transaction that's happening, up till about the year 2000, tickets weren't above 20 or $25. I know when I was going to shows, you could pay, you could see Kiss for $9.50. Now with ticket prices higher, there's an agreement. Somebody pays a ticket to see your show, and you have a job to do.
Yeah.
And I think what Dee Snider, or maybe that's the missing premise that's not in there, but I think what he's saying is, I'm not going to give my fans their money's worth. Because, if he just went out on stage and, sat in a chair and sang, we're not going to take it. I think what he's saying is, well, I could do that.
Yeah.
But people paid money to see what we were all about. And if we're not all about that anymore, well, because he keeps using the term insult to the fans.
Yeah.
And I think everything he says really lines up with it as far as what he
values. Yeah.
Exactly what he values. And I would agree with that. It's a disappointment to see, I remember, just not to digress much, but there was 2 Blue Oyster Cult shows I saw where Eric Bloom was sick. And I am still a fan of his rants. He's got that 70s blues man voice and, and he would give the Godzilla rant, and I used to go bananas. But unfortunately, one of the shows, and it's great that he played the show sick because, the show must go on. But I remember he was kind of like, Buck would sing some of the songs and he kind of wasn't doing the rants, and I understood that. But the day that Eric Bloom doesn't give the Godzilla rant or the, that's part of the show, the persona, the ethos. It's kind of like, oh man, I was like, that's why I bought the ticket.
So I'll tell you about 2 shows that we saw that I think exemplify this, and then let's look at Mark's comment about magnanimity. So Andy and I saw Iron Maiden and Alice Cooper open for them here in Milwaukee. It might have been 2014 or so, and it was an amazing show. But what was the most amazing about it was when Alice Cooper came out, he was in his 70s, and he was like doing all the stuff on stage as if he was a 30-year-old. And it was, Andy's telling me Maiden was 2012. So this is a little bit earlier. And it was amazing to be able to see a guy who was so devoted to his showmanship that he was continuing to do this stuff. So that was quite inspiring. The Epitaph tour, when Rob Halford came out, there were 2 things that kind of showed you that he was in rough shape at the time. One was that he was basically just kind of shuffling around the stage, and he did his usual, changing costumes and stuff like that. And he was doing the as good of a showmanship as he could, but he was not moving the way he has been in more recent tours, which is kind of cool to see. It's like he's back to doing okay. 2012, he wasn't moving around like that. The other thing was it was clear that he was not taking pauses from singing, but he wouldn't extend things as much during the song. And we saw him recently do what I can only describe as an athletic performance of Painkiller here in Milwaukee. That song, to sing it effectively, you could tell by what he was, the movements that he's making. I told my daughter about this, who's a singer, and she's like, well, yeah, he's doing that to open up his diaphragm, he's doing that to get more sound out of it. It was the contrast between those. You can see why they would have thought that the Epitaph tour would be a farewell tour, because he wouldn't be able to, if the trend was continuing, he wouldn't be able to continue doing that sort of stuff. So now Mark says Snyder's comments suggest a rather magnanimous character. I think he's right. I think Mark is right about that. We have to explain what magnanimity is for our audience.
To me.
Yeah, well, it's something we're familiar with, but we don't usually call it by that name. In Greek, that translates as great souledness. So it's the kind of person, Aristotle says in the Nicomachean Ethics, who knows that they are worthy of great honor. They should be treated well by other people and acknowledged by other people, and they demand great honor, but they don't demand it of the ordinary person. They realize that if you're going to be like in the top tier, you're held to certain standards, and what people are doing in the lower tier, that's okay. The ordinary person on the street, it's not going to really bother you that much. But when other people who are claiming to be in that top tier are screwing off, then there's a problem, right? Magnanimity is, for Aristotle, in between being vain, thinking that you're really hot stuff and you ought to get more than you currently are, and then being too humble, which is also a vice for Aristotle's point of view, is being small-souled. And so magnanimity is this right standpoint in between, and it means holding yourself to high standards almost reflexively, saying other people might do this sort of BS, that's not for me. If they want to do that, it's it's not good that they're doing it, but that's them. Let them do what they're going to do. This is not the Twisted Sister way or the Dee Snider way or the rock star way. In a way, we could say it's sort of a meditation on, well, what does it mean to be a genuine rock star, not just somebody who has adulation from fans and sells a lot of records, but what does it mean to be a rock star as an ethical type? So I think
Mark, that's a great point.
Yeah.
Mark, thanks for that. That's very important actually to the discussion, because I didn't think of it that way. I think right. Dee Snider's, well, it kind of goes along with what I was saying. People pay a price for the ticket. You have a job to do. Now, back in the 80s, Doc, and you see videos of Mick Brown just too drunk to play.
Michael Schenkner, that was a big problem for him too, right?
Yeah, it was a problem for him. So I love this notion. We must have come across that word in rhetoric, in Aristotle's rhetoric, but I don't remember it. So I think that's an important thing that people can remember. It's kind of like, don't worry about what the fans are doing. They've paid a ticket, and you really need to hold yourself to an ethical higher. They've showed up. They got in their car, they bought your T-shirt, they bought the ticket. You have an ethical obligation to, maybe after the show, did you get your money's worth? It would be kind of a good barometer.
This is a really interesting point, and it's not something I was thinking about before, but there's a lot of songs that bands have about like what it is to be on stage and what's involved in it. And so you know, how the sense of solidarity is produced, or things like that. And I think about the Scorpions. You know, they have a lot of stage songs. When the Smoke is Coming Down is a prime example. Always Somewhere, which is about being on tour and being lonely, missing the people, you know. And the Scorpions are one of the bands we're going to talk about in a bit, because they abandoned the idea of farewell tours, and they've got some reasoning for it. But I think it's more band centered, and less about the fans as such, and more like about, well, we really still enjoy playing, so we're going to keep doing this. And other music that's about like what it is to be on stage might be less self-centered and more like, we're in this together, you know. And some of it, like, so Kiss, Great Expectations, you know, is basically about the audience members being groupies and being there, you know, and how nice it is that the band gets to enjoy them, you know, their affection later on. You know? So it kind of shows where their head is at. I think you could probably go through a lot of songs about that bands have about what it's like to be playing in concert and engaged with the fans, or being on tour, and it would tell you a lot about the ethos of the band. What do you think?
Oh, that's, yeah. I mean, you also kind of have to. I think lyrics can be telling, but like with Kiss, their their lyrics and rants have nothing to do with their lifestyle. For example, the famous Paul Stanley rant about, we met some people backstage like vodka and orange juice, you know, and they sing about cold gin, but neither of them drink, you know. So there, you know, this whole thing about the party goes on.
Yeah.
We're heavy drinkers. This is, and it's kind of, they're presenting a show from the early days, but you know, Paul Stanley, and they weren't drinkers, they weren't drug users apparently, and Paul Stanley claims women were my only drug. So I don't know. I think some of them, I guess, if it is autobiographical, which I guess with Paul Stanley, that song would be, you know.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I think the Scorpion songs are too. I think they come out of the experience of being on long tours, you know. Always Somewhere makes perfect sense, you know, if you think about their
yeah, oh yeah,
through.
you know that, you know, when they do, I mean, it's not metal, but Bob Seger's On the Road Again.
Right. Yeah.
That's
yeah.
a fantastic one. And then
Yeah.
Jackson Browne has, what's that song? The piano song he does about after the show's over. I think those are fantastic lyrics. And that band Wasted had one called So Long. Okay. It's after the, I don't know if people remember the band Wasted. Those
Pete Way, yeah.
Pete Way, yeah. And they had a song called So Long, I thought was like the best on that album. And it was about, you know, saying goodbye to your audience, you know, the sound of the amplifiers off the walls, that whole thing, and what happens post show and how lonely it can be. And I think those tunes are touching, actually, if that's what you're talking about. That's kind of the connection with the, you know, talking real about it, but it's not, your example with Kiss was kind of like separating the fans from the band, I think, right?
Well, the fans are there basically just for the band, you know. You've got Great Expectations because it's so cool to be here with us. I think. I don't know. Maybe I'm misreading the song. But, in any case, let's come back. So Dee Snider, in the points that he's making, I think that there's basically 5 main points that he's saying that have ethical implications. So one of these is, when bands make a practice and they don't stick to farewell commitments, nobody's going to believe them. And he's saying that this is becoming a significant problem. He's not the only person to point this out, too. A number of other commentators have said there's so many farewell tours. Who knows if it's really a farewell tour anymore, right? It's also taking advantage, as you've been pointing out, Scott, of fans' desires to purchase tickets and merchandise as specifically farewell items, you know, to participate one last time and things. we talked about the point that bands that can't keep up physical performance are sticking around, and by doing so, they're letting fans down because they're not able to deliver. And I think Dee Snider is also saying that it's betraying the trust of the fans. It's really lying to them to have a farewell tour and then not stick to it. You're sort of lying retroactively. You're saying, you're making a promise that you can't fulfill. And then, of course, with the Motley Crue thing, bands that previously condemned other bands for this and do it themselves are hypocrites. And we don't like hypocrisy. And Dee Snider is saying, I'm not going to be, I mean, if I do that, you should rake me over the coals because I would be the biggest hypocrite of all. So I think there's 5 basic ethical issues in play here. And we could consider each one separately from the others. But before we do that, we should think about why bands would justify this, or why even fans would be like, I'm okay with that. So here are some arguments that could be brought forth that are not really good arguments, but they can help us, I think, clarify this. One might be, as one person said in response to me posting about this, everything's fair in rock and roll. You know, bands can do whatever the hell they like. And okay, that is in a certain sense true. They can do anything that they like, but that doesn't make it okay.
I can do anything I like.
Exactly.
Never mind the band. I can go out and, pull out the scrubs of my neighbors if I want. But that doesn't mean that's a nice thing to do.
Exactly. So I don't think that's much of an argument at all, you know. And it's interesting that people would bring this up and that they'd be like, it's okay, you know, no problem with it. Another is that, well, and you brought this up in discussion with me before as sort of a devil's advocate thing, if fans are willing to pay for it, what's the problem? You know, I mean, if people are dumb enough or gullible enough to buy into this and want to engage in wishful thinking, or they just want to blow their extra income on, you know, one last tour merch or something like that, who's being harmed, you know? And go ahead.
But you had a good response to that. You had a great response to that. I think you should follow up with what you said, because I thought you were absolutely right. I was trying to play devil's advocate, but you were right on that.
Well, I mean, people are being harmed because you're violating trust, or you're not, as you pointed out, you're not delivering what it is that there's sort of an implicit contract. We're going to give you a good performance that doesn't include just, you know, wandering around stages and mumbling things. You know who I have in mind there, right? But it could be other people as well. You owe being at the top of your game to them. There's another one that says, well, and this is very cynical, well, what are the fans going to do? You know, not go see their favorite bands if they go out on tour again?
Right. Yes,
you know?
they can.
I think that's
power,
oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. This is something I keep saying for so many situations. When you, the person, have the power to make the change, let's say you don't. It's like all the musicians that complain about their music on Spotify. We only get fractions of a penny. Well, you can't complain if your stuff is on Spotify. Pull it off, put it on your website, and Spotify has nothing. So if they had no music on there, they'd go bankrupt because they have nothing. So as long as you're willing to do it.
So the argument there with the fans would be, hey, fans, if you don't want to be exploited, don't go and see bands after their farewell tour.
Well, that's true, but it's kind of when I asked that question, I kind of came up with the example. I guess that's right. Like those con artists that go after the elderly, where they call them up, we need your social security number. Now, or we're going to give you this. Now, the person that got conned might not know they got conned, and they might be just as happy. It does not mean that the person that conned them out of money wasn't unethical.
Right. Yeah.
So I think people going to the show, I don't know if con is a fair word, if that's an inflammatory word.
I think it'd have to be like a particularly bad performance in order to justify that, but there may have been cases like that, you know?
Well, you know, just going back out on tour, and it's kind of like, I wonder if they're on the tour bus on their farewell tour going, we'll wait 3 years and then we'll do this again. I mean, that'd be interesting.
Yeah. Oh, Mark has a good point here. I think of it in terms of the violation of informed consent. Fans can't consent to what they're purchasing if they're misinformed. So in being told that this is a farewell tour, we're never going to do another one after this, the fans are being misinformed about what's going on.
Well, I think it's fine to buy tickets for the farewell tour, but I guess the question is, if it's their third farewell tour, it's, I guess it's like, well, you could be a stick in the mud and protest, or you could go have fun at the show. It's still unethical, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because the more farewell tours that you do, given that you're going to die sometime, the greater the odds are for any one farewell tour that it truly is the last farewell tour, right?
Well, that's why I say just tour until you don't come back. Instead of making a big deal about it. I was going to make a point. I forget. Continue. Sorry.
Well, so I think that, we could make some distinctions where I think it could be okay to come back from a farewell tour. And so, what are the things that cause bands to stop touring? I think we can break it down into a number of different things. One is like conflict within a band where they just can't get along and they have to break up or go on hiatus. And it could be because some of the band members are struggling with like addiction or personal problems or, midlife crises or things like that. So that might put a band on hold for a while, right? The realization that it's just too much, that the band is too old, that could be something that could end it. Death or incapacitation of key bandmates. I mean, it's one thing if you lose somebody who hasn't been with the band for a really long time and isn't integral to the sound, but if Iron Maiden loses Steve Harris, I don't think they come back from it. I don't think they're Iron Maiden, even if they go ahead.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I just said I was going to ask you, would you buy a ticket to see Iron Maiden without Steve Harris?
I think probably not.
I agree.
I think I would waver because I would still want to support the band. And it's not as if it's not like say Wasp, right? Where Wasp is at this point Blackie Lawless and whoever he hires to work with him. They've had some great, like Randy Piper and Chris Holmes. They've had some great guitarists. I can't remember a single drummer from Wasp. So I don't think that the drummers made a huge impact. And I couldn't tell you off the top of my head who's playing with them right now. If Blackie Lawless goes, there is no Wasp. Iron Maiden, I mean, Dave Murray and Adrian Smith, really talented players, Bruce Dickinson, Nickel McBrain,
and I had a hard time in the 90s when Adrian Smith left. I had a very hard time because I thought the contrast between Dave Murray and Adrian Smith was so fantastic.
Yeah, and then you got Yannick Ayers to replace him. Yeah,
and then Yannick was he played too much like Dave Murray, but not as good as Dave Murray, I don't think. So when you heard the live stuff, it was kind of like, well, I could tell that's Dave Murray because it's executed better, but the style's the same.
Yeah.
When it was Adrian Smith, the next guitarist would come in and you'd be psyched because of style difference. Adrian's melodic bluesy thing.
Yeah.
And so I'm also a big Adrian Smith fan. I think he's a really important part of the band with his backup vocals and in his writing. Wasted Years is a great one, but he's Steve Harris is the main writer, but.
So that's a really tough one. Maybe Iron Maiden couldn't be franchised in the way that we were talking about Kiss being franchised.
Well, I was just going to say, would you go see a franchise Iron Maiden? No. I mean, that's an Iron Maiden tribute band.
Yeah.
Look, Bruce Dickinson keeps his health up. He gives us our money's worth. Every time I've seen them, I get my money's worth when I go see them. They're a hardworking band.
Yeah. Quite true. I think you'd say the same thing about Judas Priest and at this point in time, even an older band like Uriah Heep, who we saw, amazing show,
That's so great to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing that I think could be, going back to this thing about things that put bands on hiatus, this would pertain to earlier on when metal became, a much harder sell, you could say. So think about the 90s. There were, like the genres developing, but for a lot of the big acts, it was a very lean time for them. And quite a few bands maybe had to say, well, this is going to be it. So financial prospects. And now in the time of COVID-19, nobody's quite sure what's going to happen either, right? So some bands that like Iron Maiden will always sell out anywhere where they go. Same thing with Judas Priest. Other bands that are quite good, like Raven, they had to do a Kickstarter for their last big album. So they're still struggling, even though they really deserve to succeed. If they were to go on a farewell tour and then come back when circumstances have changed, financially, medically, in terms of band harmony, maybe there's a case to be made that would be okay. So like with Ozzy Osbourne, he did the no more tours when he thought that he had MS. And so coming back from that, maybe there's a case for it's okay in that case, right? Now, maybe you only get one shot to do that. Maybe you can't do it indefinitely. So maybe No More Tours 2 has to be the last tour.
That makes sense. And yeah, that's, if you think it's it for you.
Yeah.
I didn't know that, actually. You're the one that told me. I didn't know about the No More Tours was because of that. Maybe I knew at the time, but I tend to forget things. So I think, yeah. Okay, so you'll get a pass on that.
Similar
Absolutely.
thing with Judas Priest and the Epitaph tour, right? Where Rob Halford was clearly not doing well on the tour, was giving it his best, but it wasn't his best in 2012, is not his best in 2018.
Well, I don't want to play Monday morning quarterback on this, but they shouldn't have called it a farewell tour. They should have said it's a special tour. We're going to be playing a retrospective. And then if another tour doesn't happen, it will come out in the news that Rob's not doing great.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
well, and
I don't know.
That's in effect what they did afterwards. They said, oh, well, we misspoke. It wasn't really a farewell tour. And now the Scorpions, let's talk about them, because they did a farewell tour and it was a 3-year long tour, like all over the world, and then they decided that it wasn't a farewell tour after all. So Matthias Jobs said that the idea for a Scorpions farewell tour came from the manager at the time. He said that every member of the lineup thought that his bandmates wanted to retire. It wasn't until they actually got on the road that they realized that they didn't want to retire. And so they were kind of suckered into it, you might say. And he said, we thought it rationally. It might be a good idea to say bye while we were still in the best shape, leave the scene with the best impression. But 7 years later, it still goes as well. We still run around like crazy and we don't look that much different. So we postponed the end of everything and now we don't know. Klaus Meine says in an interview, there were so many images in our minds and so many emotions in our hearts. Everything we experienced between 2010 and 2012 was so powerful. You stand on stage, look down and see so many fans, including the younger generation, who are really getting into it and saying, guys, this is so cool. We're seeing you for the first time. When will you be back? And here's the key line. It's so motivating and inspiring to play for 3 generations. We're having too much fun to put down the guitars. So Klaus Meine is saying, we realized by doing the tour that we weren't ready to say goodbye, that there's more in us to do. Now, he's talking as if this is like, oh man, it's for the fans. They're all like, we still want to see you, rock on, Scorpions. But is it selfish? Is it more like being the artist up on stage who's like, my needs, my demands, my wishes take priority. I think I've still got something, left in me. So therefore I should get to keep doing this. It's not really a farewell tour. It's takesy backsies, I'm conflicted about this. I think on the one hand, that recognition, I think there's something real there in talking about, man, when you look out at this audience and you see these people having a great time, and some of them are older people who know like every line of the songs, and some of them are younger people who are like, holy crap, these old guys rock. I want to see them again. There's something to that. But the way that it's phrased to me makes it sound a little self-indulgent. What do you think?
Well, the self-indulgence comes from the phrase farewell tour. So
I think, okay.
so the I don't think it's selfish if a band wants to go play and do a tour. The selfish part comes in going back to the monetary thing. It's our farewell tour. Here's our exclusive merch, which people, like I said, people are going to buy 10 of each
Yeah.
and sell it on eBay. And, so they're going to rack in the money.
So there's a speculation part of it, you could say.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, to say this is a farewell tour, you said it earlier, you don't just decide it when you're rehearsing for the tour. You this is a long plan.
Yeah, right,
this has been
right, yeah.
This has been many meetings with the management, the record companies, how are we going to close out? Well, like, think of the business parts, contract sign. How are we going to close this out and divvy the money? How are the future album sales going to be, as far as, who's going to get money from that? So you have a lot of, loose ends to tie before you go on a farewell tour. You would imagine, so, you have to tell your crew they're not going to work anymore. So you're going to have to, so I think if you just did a tour and said, well, I don't know, maybe we'll do another album, maybe we won't. But then you decide, well, we have more to say. That's fine. That's great. It's your decision what you do with your music and your band. I think the big thing is using that farewell. Let's say the farewell tour is a big marketing thing, right? It's marketing. I mean, right? If because like, let's say I decided that I'm gonna stop playing my original music. I'm not gonna put posters around Boston and everything. This is Scott Tarulli's farewell tour, because
I can't.
Though,
if you wanted to.
Yeah, but who would care? It's kind of like, it's not.
Yeah.
The farewell tour is a business. It's a marketing business plan. And it's kind of like, we're going to make a big deal about this. We're going to have special this and that. And to come back from it, I have to say, maybe that's, if they were to do other projects, it doesn't mean they can't do music anymore. So if, say, Iron Maiden did one, but Dave Murray formed a new band, that's totally cool. Or they all did their own things, but we won't see Iron Maiden again.
Yeah. There's a point that Andy made a while back that I want to come back to that I think kind of fits in here. She says, some of the best tours we've seen, whether they were farewell tours or not, included the history of their storytelling as musicians, especially when the careers spanned over decades. Saxon did this in the smaller performance that we attended. As a matter of fact, that was at the Northern Lights Theater here at the Potawatomi Casino. And it was Saxons and Black Star Riders / Thin Lizzy, right? Scott Gorham is there, and they had a thing before that where Biff Byford and Scott Gorham got up on stage and answered questions about the band's past. It was sort of like a little warm-up thing.
A Q&A?
Yeah, it was quite impressive. But then Saxon did that during their thing. They were like, well, here's one from, Wheels of Steel. Here's one from this. Here's one from this. We were thinking about this when we did it. And I think, when you have a catalog that admits of that, because you've done, over a dozen studio albums and gone on a lot of tours, that's something that's feasible. I don't know that every band could actually do that, right?
Well, that's true. The smaller venue, the more intimate venue.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another advantage to it. But I do like that idea. I do like, especially, all these bands in the 70s and 80s were so mysterious. We didn't have Twitter to know what they were doing every moment.
We had read Circus and Hit Parader and Kerrang and stuff like that, right?
And then you had the poster of Blackie Lawless on your dorm room or something, and they were like they were not human to us. They were rock stars. But now, years later, they've grown older and more mature in some ways, and for them to kind of say, hey, you were there with us and we want to tell you what was going on, for me, I think that's really I think you said Blue Oyster Cult was doing that too. That Eric Bloom was telling some stories.
Yeah, yeah. Again, same venue. Very small, intimate venue. That's
Cool.
where you can really do that sort of thing much easier, I would say. You know.
But I do love the story aspect. That's cool. I mean, like I'm saying, like, at one time they were like, bigger than life. And now it's kind of like, you're in it, you're having fun. And then they're like, hey, when this album came out, I bought it the day it came out and I mowed like 6 lawns to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
um, anyway, I just thought it was cool.
Well, so coming back to the ethics of doing farewell tours, I mean, I personally think that there could be some reasons to come out of the post farewell retirement and start touring again. But I think that you almost have to like prove your case. You've got to make a case for why you deserve to do that and other bands don't. So the prima facie view should be, if you've done a farewell tour, that's it for you. You can reconfigure as musicians in a different format, but that you can't just go back out on tour. What do you think?
Well, first of all, can you quickly explain prima facie? What is
sort of on its face, sort of like all things being equal, right? So if you don't have some overriding reason why you should be going back out on tour that other people would accept, not just you, but other people who are reasonable, I don't think ethically you get to do that. I mean, you can do it like Motley Crue does, but I mean, Motley Crue is an interesting case because they committed publicly to saying this is BS, you shouldn't be doing this, and then they did it themselves. So I think that when we can actually talk, one of the things we talk about in ethics are what we call prima facie duties. These are duties that we generally feel that we owe to other people. And there could be exceptions, but one of these is what we call a duty of fidelity. That's what W.D. Ross called it. And fidelity means keeping the promises that you made. I think when you do a farewell tour, you're making a promise that this is your last tour, and it's not just about taking advantage of people financially. I think that the points that you're making about that are dead on. But I think even if like they weren't making a buck off of it, it would still be the wrong thing to do in most cases because they're breaking a trust that they've built with their audience. They're exploiting the trust that they have in order to do something for whatever motive they have. Maybe some of them can't sit at home and enjoy retirement. Maybe some of them need to make more money. Maybe with some of them it's an ego thing. They can't be who they are without having a million fans in front of them.
But those are, I mean, as painful as that might be, those are things that would fall under self-serving.
Yeah.
But again, I don't have a problem with it if they don't say farewell. So, so I just wanted clarification on that term. But I think it can't be black or white because I agree with you. There has to be, if you're going to break that trust, you better have a good
overriding reason. Yeah.
Like, I guess for Rob Halford, it's like, wait, I didn't give you my best. It's kind of what we're saying.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah. That actually, I think that could be a good justification. It could be like the last tour that we did, we weren't at our best. We want to give you now Judas Priest at its best,
And here's why I'm at my best. Let's say, look, I started working out. I got out of a depression. I got a vocal coach. I got, and, it wouldn't be a bad idea for the band to do one live tune on a sound stage and put it out on social media and go, what do you think?
Should we go back on tour?
Well, because I agree with you. If you've made a promise, I don't know if, you better have like a really good reason for breaking that promise because people do get mad. It's kind of like, well, people say another farewell tour. Like we said before, some people, they weren't coming to my state. So I rented a hotel and I bought a flight. I went out and I took a week off of unpaid work and because this was the last chance I'd get to see you, and that happens a lot. People buy hotel rooms, buy flights. It's not just the $200 ticket or whatever it is. They put their life on hold to be there, be part of this moment that later became not the moment they paid for.
Yeah. The point that Dee Snider made about when people do this as a practice, eventually nobody's going to believe anybody saying it's a farewell tour. That's really an important point as well, and that connects to what in ethics we call the Kantian categorical imperative, which says that we should only do things that we can universalize. And by that we mean do things that we would say, okay, if everybody in the world behaved this way, would we be okay with that? Would things even make sense? And Kant says,
this is from, I'm sorry, the philosopher Kant.
Yeah, Immanuel Kant. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And
sorry.
No problem. He says certain things, if we were to totally universalize them, there would be such illogic, such contradiction that certain institutions wouldn't even make any sense. Promises are one of those. If everybody could just break a promise whenever they wanted to, and not only could, but did, then after a while, nobody would believe any promises. And you don't have to have everybody doing it before you reach a tipping point. There's so a lot of ethicists have said, hey, Kant, it never happens that way. But you can say, pragmatically, you can reach a tipping point where the trust is gone. Not just trust in one band or one person, trust across the board, where we would reach the point where, somebody would be like, this is our farewell tour. And everyone's like, yeah, right, whatever. You're not doing a real farewell tour. We don't know if it is or not. When you reach that tipping point, you're in trouble. And the financial incentives of doing farewell tours are going to not pay off when they do that, because people will be like, I don't know, maybe they'll be back next year. I'm not going to buy the tickets. I'm not going to do the elaborate planning required for that. So I think that Snyder's on to a really important point with that.
I just want to, with that theory, I like it. So if I'm in a community of people and I said I'm going to be the one that acts out, I'm going to slash some tires, and I guess what your point is, well, if you're okay with everybody doing that, then we wouldn't have a small society. We wouldn't function. And I guess it's not fair to say to Kant, it's not fair to say, well, that would never happen, because I don't think that's his point. I think it's a moral barometer, if I'm correct. I think it's kind of a, think before you do it, just because I can get away with it. Would you be okay if everyone else did it? And if your answer is no, so, but yeah, I like that tipping point where it's kind of like, I'm not going to break plans. I already saw them. And I mean, that would be my take on it, but obviously people will, KISS could do as many tours as they want. People will buy tickets, even if Paul Stanley's in a wheelchair. I feel like it's just, they have that kind of diehard.
Can you imagine them coming out on Rascals?
I can, but that's really interesting. I'm learning a lot. This is good.
Yeah. Another thing that we can talk about, actually, before we do that, let's take Mark's question here that I think is kind of good. Do you owe your audience a farewell tour? Isn't just suddenly deciding that you're no longer touring in some way also unfair to your audience? So you get to the end of a tour and you're like, man, that tour really took it out of us. I'm done, man. That's it. We're no longer doing tours. And then everyone who didn't buy a ticket because they didn't know it was the last tour would be like, oh, I missed them. Now I'm never going to get to see them. I think, my
good point, Mark.
I kind of think you don't actually owe it to say this is a farewell tour.
I don't think so, because, well, you can finish the tour and something can come up and that's your last and you didn't know it. But again, making the conscious decision, deliberating over it, and then going on and saying, this is the big bang out of here, and then going, I'm bored, or, let's just go out, let's make some more money, or, you have an expensive life habit. You bought too many motorcycles, too many cars.
I wonder, though, if there isn't another issue that's raised by Mark's question, do musicians that have a large fan base, do they kind of owe a certain transparency to their audience about like how they're doing physically, how they're how they're doing mentally, so like if you knew that somebody is touring and they're sick, right, and that they're this is probably going to be their farewell tour because they've got a diagnosis that they're going to be gone in a year. um, they probably should disclose that. I mean, here we run into things where, like, you can say, "Well, no, that's their private life. They get to keep that to themselves." I don't know.
It's hard to keep things under wrap, in 2020. I mean, maybe in 1980, you could quietly do that, but
Yeah,
you just need one. Um, you need Eddie Trunk to raise, is so and so. And if the fans speculate it's the final tour and you don't announce it as such, it might be like, hey, Greg, let's go see this band because this might be their last one.
yeah,
But if they went and did another one, we wouldn't feel betrayed because they never said this is our last one. Either we were misinformed or the problem fixed itself.
yeah,
Like the thing with Halford is a great example of, I want to give my fans the money's worth. We'll give it one more time, but wait, now we're going to give you some money. Because like I saw them, 2 nights before you or after you, like a few years ago.
okay.
And it was unbelievable. I mean, I was jumping up and down going crazy. It was a great show.
Mark has a follow-up that I think is this is a good one. If you decide that the next tour is your final tour, should you tell your audience? So
you mean on the before your second to last tour?
No, you're deciding before you go on tour. You've got like a whole tour planned out, and then you're like, "Listen, guys, let's have a band meeting. Is this going to be our last tour?" And then everybody in the band is like, "Man, I'm so glad you asked that because I'm tired of this. I want to like enjoy myself in my last 10 to 20 years of life." If you know that that's going to be your last tour, do you have a duty to announce it as a farewell tour?
Let me kind of dig a little before that. You don't know it's your last tour. You're tired at the moment.
Okay.
Maybe what you need is 2 years off and then recharge your batteries and you're ready. And maybe that's what we're seeing. Oh God, I can't do another day of this. But then 2 years later, something happened. You met a new partner. You got out of a toxic marriage. You started taking care of yourself, and there should be some thought of like, it's kind of like wedding vows. So of course you can get divorced, but you better think of those and take them seriously.
I kind of think if there's medical stuff involved, you probably and you know that it's going to preclude you from continuing, you probably should make that your farewell tour. That doesn't necessarily mean the whole band has to. It really depends on the band. So like with Lemmy, he is Motorhead. And now Mickey D's with the Scorpions now, and I'm not sure where the guitarist went off to, but and they made a decision. We're not trying to continue Motorhead without Lemmy. That would be ridiculous, which is the right call. And I think it was fairly quick what happened with him. Dio is another prime example. And with Dio, I was wondering if we should include this. That idea of having Dio's hologram and then the members of the band playing. I like Dio and I like Wendy Dio, but I think that was a bad decision on their part. And I can understand, besides the financial things and besides I wonder if we could pull this off. The idea of like appealing to the fans is a good one. We're going to give you one more chance to be there, but they didn't. I don't know. I don't think they had his consent to do that. Maybe they did. Maybe he had a conversation.
I think I hate the idea because part of it.
Of
if you go to a show, what's that?
Of holograms?
Well, yeah, because let's say you buy a front row ticket, to get Dio to give you a high five in real life, or to get, you're screaming along with the lyrics of Dio to point to you, and be part of the aesthetic energies of a the energy of the room, right? So part of that is, well, if Dio's not really there, he's not feeding off the room. This is the exact same way he acted in Philadelphia, the exact way he acted in Texas. And so now what you're missing the live experience of, even if the set list is going to be the same, something happened to everybody that day where the performance is either. I've seen Dio's band pretty good, and I've seen them mind-blowingly on fire. And if you have Dio playing singing the exact same way, saying the same rants everywhere, you're not having the live experience. You might as well buy the DVD.
Let me push this a little bit then. So imagine that we've got, a really super powered AI, and they've got tons and tons of Dio footage. So they can have an effective hologram that can respond spontaneously to, say, the crowd, and point to the guy in the front row. Obviously you can't give him a high five because you can't touch or anything like that, but it can respond spontaneously, and it can to some degree feed off the band, and do things like come up with new between song stories or something like that.
Well, no,
would that be okay?
No, I mean, I shouldn't say no. That's I should say, in my opinion, you're still not dealing with a breathing human that has human emotions. Maybe they had a little bit too much to drink the night before, so they're a little hungover, so it's going to be a little different. These are all moments. Or they slept really well, or the band they had a fight with Dio, or they got along and had a moment, and all of a sudden there's connection on stage. You're still not a hologram's pointing at you. It's not Dio.
Yeah.
So we could do this with computer. You could get what are those? Back then they were trying to do, in the 80s, they were trying to do those AI. You would talk to them in text, and they would respond based off of. We weren't talking to a real person,
right?
And it's just my thing. I mean, it's just like the Kiss thing. You're not seeing Paul and Gene, and you're not
hear that maybe Kiss will make their franchise a hologram affair eventually.
But
I think there's probably a good chance that they would do that.
But to me, they might as well do a laser show that tours, like those. You go into what are those called? Wow, where's my brain? Where you go down and it's a dome, and there's like lasers, and there's pictures.
Like in a planetarium.
Yeah. You might as well do a Kiss planetarium show with footage of Paul Stanley from back in the day, and that makes more sense.
All the masks, like swooping around the sky.
That would be cool, because that's appropriate. That's the show. It's not, you're not buying a ticket to pretend you're experiencing a Kiss show. And I don't care if somebody's going to be hired to do Paul Stanley rants. It's not Paul Stanley doing the rants.
I'm just thinking about, I don't think there's an item that Kiss hasn't been willing to stamp their name and faces on at one point in time over their career. And there isn't anything, media-wise that's too cheesy for Kiss to appear in. If you've ever seen the Scooby-Doo things where Kiss shows up, or the thing where they're in the amusement park. I forget what it's
Kiss
called.
Meets the Phantom of the Park.
That's right. Yeah.
I own that.
we were so excited when we were kids to see that, because it was Kiss, right? And we ignored the fact that it was such a terrible movie.
I know, and they say it. They didn't even know what they were doing.
My favorite
is when they're like in full makeup and they're like suntanning by the pool.
Yeah.
Like the big boots and everything.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe I'm in the minimum. I mean, like, part of the live experience and paying for a ticket is the energy of the crowd, okay. And kind of like the band responding to the energy of the crowd, based off of what happened to them. Like for me, live performance versus live album is a very different thing. And that's what motivates me to buy a ticket, to be part of the experience. Yeah. If it's a computerized experience, it's not, people argue this all the time. We should just have AI write all the music, because nobody will know the difference. and they want to take there's nothing computers will they'll be able to do everything in 20 years. We won't need people. Well, of course we need people. What happened to the human element? I mean,
Yeah.
the best you can do is program a computer to do what we can already do. We can already compose. I can compose like Bach. I can rip him off and do his things. You don't need a computer to do that. You don't need a
You know,
computer.
the deep, is it called deep thought, or the AI that was doing visual stuff that Google came out with? It made very interesting compositions. They all kind of looked the same, and they were all kind of creepy too. Like they had a penchant for putting eyes in all sorts of places, doing things that probably humans wouldn't do. And so it did create something that was arguably new, but it wasn't something that was arguably good. You know?
Well,
So maybe computers could do some of this.
but my question is why? Humans do that. We invent. We create, we evolve. I mean, if
Yeah.
you look at music history, if you look at art history, it wasn't until the French Impressionists that we had modern art or modern music with Debussy and Ravel, and we've
Yeah.
evolved.
I mean,
So
I think that the reasons why people would do it, some of it would be financial, because when you have AIs, whoever owns the AIs owns the stuff, right? So you can make money by having your AIs doing things. But I think there's also this impetus to see, well, can we do it with AIs, right? There's this curiosity on the part of people that drives things forward, and it's similar to the curiosity that says, man, what if I do this with my guitar over by the speakers? Can I get a sound out of it? It's the same drive, but it's being used in different ways. Mark says, did you see the AI developed to finish Schubert's Unfinished Symphony? Think we'll ever have something like that with Iommi's box of unfinished riffs. They tour that as Black Sabbath 50 years from now with holograms. I haven't seen that, but I mean, that's the sort of thing that we're talking about. I will say this. I've seen a description of the doom metal band Orchid as the band that made all the songs that Black Sabbath didn't make, because they've got like a really close. The singer is not exactly Ozzy. I actually like the singer quite a bit, but the bassist could very well be Geezer Butler. The guitarist could very well be Tony Iommi, the way that the stuff sounds. So we've already got humans kind of doing that. Go ahead.
I want to respond. So the AI development to finish Schubert's Unfinished Symphony, we don't need AI to do that. We know Schubert's tendencies. We know what his rules he developed. Any good composer
you do.
can do it.
I would probably end it with like a da 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 da. Because I don't know Schubert, and I'm a Philistine, right? But you're right. You could do it.
Well, I mean, like, just take a really good composer. I mean, I do have a background in classical composition. It's not really what I do. I compose, but you get any great, and it's like I said, I could, like here, I've studied these my whole life, right? And I went through a time where I wrote Bach-like. I took the progressions, the outline. You don't need AI to do it. So my question is, why you have an AI doing something a human could probably do better? Because there's the argument of what's better.
Yeah.
But any of these things, maybe you and I could finish Black Sabbath riffs because we know what a Black Sabbath riff sounds like.
Yeah.
But some things are better left undone. Why finish it? It's kind of like, are we going to take the partially burned Aristotle scrolls? I mean, I don't know if there are any. And we're going to have AI say, this is what Aristotle would have written next. I mean, what would you say to that? That can't happen.
Well, yeah. I mean, we don't have those scrolls. We do have some screwed up scrolls from other thinkers, and I suppose you could do that, but it would be gobbledygook most likely. I don't know that it would actually be some
but
sort of.
But
go ahead.
But scholars wouldn't take it seriously, would they?
No, I don't think so. And
that's what I'm saying.
So I mean, that's a really interesting parallel. Should musicians take seriously what AI musicians quotes are doing?
Well, I'll tell you why not, is because for AI to work, we have to feed in human thinking,
Yeah.
right? So for AI to finish Schubert,
You got to feed
you
in
have
all
to
those Schubert. Yeah.
we have to put in what we know about Schubert for it to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And why go that extra step when we could just sit down and say it might go something like this, you know? But we'll never know what it really, I'm thinking leave it go, leave it alone. There's nothing, I'm not sure about this. We're starting to get this discussion about farewell tours and stuff, but why are we prolonging? What's wrong with, should we get like a Bach hologram and we think we're seeing Bach perform in
Have him
17
up there playing.
yeah, with the harpsichord.
You
Um,
know, it's kind of funny if you think about this. We were joking about supergroups at the beginning of this. If we're gonna do this, we could have like all these modules, and they could be like, okay, so we got Tony Iommi over here. Like recently, there was a thing on Twitter. It was a challenge. Put together, your super group with these four players, and I was thinking four probably isn't enough because, not
right.
for a metal band, you probably need two guitarists or a guitarist and an organist. Although you can do power trios and stuff like that. And I was thinking like, who are my favorite people? And obviously like Lemmy and Dio would be cool to bring together, and maybe Steve Harris as well. But Lemmy's already playing bass, so I don't know, But Lemmy could, I guess, kind of play his bass like a rhythm guitar, and then what guitarist do you bring in? And now you're done. Now you don't have a drummer, And so, but imagine you could do that, and like you've got like the Steve Harris cartridge, right? And you've got the, I don't know, Paul Stanley cartridge or whatever, and you just plunk them all in, and you're like, there you go, super group. And the AI is set up in such a way that their egos, are tamped down maybe in the settings, and they won't like, fail to cooperate with each other. And then you're like, so what would it be like if these people were all playing together?
Well,
maybe that's feasible down the line. I don't know. Would it actually be, good music? We'd have to experiment and find out.
well, AI could AI can never do it because sometimes you don't know there's too many variables that
Yeah.
AI would miss. For example, you walk in the room and somebody rubs you the wrong way just instantly. Now, AI is not going to have that variable because nobody knows that, and the people don't know it when they get together.
Now, something that AI can't do that you're familiar with, and I've done it as well. When you make a mistake in a song that you're playing and you recover from the mistake in such a way that you like get back into whatever you're supposed to be doing and you introduce something new, it's sort of like falling off balance and then catching yourself in just the right way where you push the button that you're supposed to push.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with mistakes. And sometimes that's part of the performance,
But an AI can't effectively do that.
But then people argue, well, like I remember when drum machines came out, we all argued the human feel went, oh, well, we'll make them make mistakes. Well, that's not the point. That's making mistakes is not humanizing it.
Well, it's not making mistakes though. It's introducing a certain new algorithm, which isn't making a mistake, but is supposed to sound like making a mistake. I think there's
right, but it's not organic.
Yeah.
It's like, and if I go up with, say I go up with three other guitar players and we all make mistakes, we're going to recover in entirely unique ways.
Yeah.
So, again, a lot of people are very AI, and I just say, why? And it's like, for one, you go ahead, it's like you go to the bank now. It's like, well, that's all online. Well, I'm talking to you now. And can you not help me resolve this issue? Well, I don't have that. Go online. So you're saying that you want your job replaced by, so it's, I don't understand the appeal of AI rather than, I do understand the curiosity and it could be kind of cool and interesting, but the supergroup thing, you'd never know from AI. It could give you something that comes out, but there's too many variables that even the people would never know, because you get them in a room, they could start talking about politics and get in a fight, or they could start talking about politics and really unite, or it could be something outside of the music, or maybe they can't adapt to their time together and there's no way you could program that in because how Paul Stanley, for example, would do his rhythm guitar with this with Nico McBrain. They'd have to work it out somehow, and
Yeah.
you never know how it. There's way too many people oversimplify what this is. Really, we're pouring rules into a computer that we can do ourselves, so the computer can do it.
Yeah.
Anyways, I do have strong feelings about AI, so
No,
it's kind of like
I think it's a very interesting topic to go into. Coming back to the farewell tours, I think one of the points in terms of ethics that I wanted to draw out a little bit more. We can talk about moral theories like virtue ethics, or we talked about some deontological ethics. Um, Capturing that relationship between the band and the audience that has been built up over time and comes with, as I think Dee Snider is rightly pointing out, comes with some not just obligations, but something that has to do with the very structure of the relationship. Um, it's something that, you use that word organically, it's grown organically over time. If a band has been giving out music by issuing albums and going out on tours for 40 years, that's something new has happened in that. I mean, that's two generations. And the Scorpion's talking about looking out in the audience and seeing three generations out there. I think that fan band relationship is something that some bands play fast and loose with, and other bands take more seriously. And you can like be pretending to take it seriously when you come on stage and you're like, "Hello, Milwaukee," and you have no idea where the hell you are. You've just been fed that.
it's our favorite place to play.
Exactly, right. But I think there's something there, and this has to do with the ethics of farewell tours, that says that you really have to take, you've earned this trust through hard work and all the things that you've done, and probably making some mistakes and then recovering from them later on. You've earned this trust from at least some of your audience, who are the devoted fans. You really do owe something to them in terms of truthfulness and thinking things through and not abusing that trust. And I think that's part of what Dee Snider was articulating in his comments. So it's going beyond just like rules or duties to talking about a relationship, an ongoing
I like
relationship.
the key thing that you said, thinking things through.
Okay.
And I think that's key, because I like your example earlier. It's kind of like, I'm tired, I can't do this anymore. If you really thought it through, you might say, well, instead of a farewell tour, why don't I just unburn out for 2 years and see if we feel like making a record.
Yeah.
We're still kind of young, we're in our 50s kind of thing or whatever. And, that way, I guess if they thought it through, that's a key to me. That's key. I'm sorry. That's a key thing. Because, you should have lived life long enough to know that your mind can change in a month after the tour. Like, I'm bored.
Yeah. So this is a good thing to kind of go out on and bring this to a close. Do you think that part of the reason why some bands don't do that is because they're more driven by their egos as being rock stars? So like, when Motley Crue signs an agreement with each other saying we're not going to do any more tours, it's not only about like, okay, we're going to really get a lot of merch money out of this tour because everyone knows it. It's also like a way of declaring yourself in a rather outspoken, bombastic way that I think kind of fits in with who Motley Crue were. When Dee Snider and the Twisted Sister guys say this is it, and they're doing it in a more prudential way, I think it's less about, although I mean, not to say that the Twisted Sister guys aren't larger than life, right? But
Right.
I think they're doing it in a different manner. So maybe personalities play an important role in this. Some people are more thoughtful than others.
Actually, that's a great point. And we'd have to take, we'd have to know these people. I mean, I guess if you and I knew all these people personally, we can say, well, so-and-so is in it for him or herself.
Yeah.
You take someone like Dora, who is amazing to her fans. And I saw her a couple of years ago, and she was sick. She waited for 3 hours and took a picture with every single person at the
Wow.
show. And she's always been really good to her fans. And I think she's someone that is not going to pull a "this is my farewell" and come back. And it's hard for her to get this country. It's hard enough for her to get here, but I guess what you see as a fan on how people treat the fans. I know some people that have. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'll tell you a story that's kind of funny about Kiss. So we saw them live at Letterman because we were part of the Kiss Army. So we got the tickets.
Nice.
We went down to the city, and in New York, it's hard to get out of a venue without encountering some fans because of just the way places are set up. So after the show,
Just go back doors.
Yeah, Andy was like, "Hey, do you want to go see the back door area?" And I was like, "Sure." And so we go back there, and 3 members of the band came out and like signed autographs and did all sorts of like talking with people. That was really cool. And Paul Stanley was one of them. The one guy who like had a towel over his head, went straight to the limo, and wouldn't like talk to anybody. Gene Simmons, he was out of there. But all the rest of the band hung around, not for an inordinate amount of time, but at least for a little bit of time.
I heard a story about Gene Simmons, and I don't know who told me. They were in an elevator with Gene Simmons going down, and he was ready to do one of his meet and greets. And whoever told me said, "Hey, do you mind if I get a picture with you? I don't mean to bother you." And he goes, No, I won't get a picture with you. Now, he thought Gene was being a jerk, but on the other hand, he's ready to walk out for people that paid $200 to take a picture with him.
He doesn't want to cheapen the brand, so to speak.
Cheapen the brand, but that's interesting. And that happened with like Night Ranger. So everybody in the band is hanging out after, and Jack Blades is nowhere to be seen. And eventually, an hour later, he comes out with a towel over his head with escorts and pushes through people. And it's like,
yeah,
you can't say hi to people that bought all your records, and everybody else in the band is fine by it. But he did his meet and greet earlier, so.
So let's take Mark's last point, and then we'll bring this to a close. To go back to the transparency point, that's crucial to the relationship. Social media at least allows more of that now than in the past, but that comes out with more responsibility for the bands. Yeah, I think we are in a different era because of that. That's completely right. And you mentioned like, let's say that person is like, I'm taking a selfie anyway. That would be feasible to do, and he could be even like streaming it on Facebook Live, and shows Gene Simmons struggling for the phone, and now you've got a story, right? So yeah.
Well, I want to point out something kind of crucial that I know we're coming to a close, but in 1985, when we were seeing all these bands, rock and roll was only 20 years old, 21 years old. So there's no bands retiring unless, even the Stones were young in 85 still. I mean, 95. Now where we are now, we are in the first era now of bands being really old. This is probably the first time in history where rock and roll has existed long enough that, this is an issue. This wasn't an issue in 1980. You think it's been 16 years since the Beatles were on the Ed Sullivan Show. So 16 years of rock and roll, Deep Purple in 1970. That band was only 14 years old by that point. I guess we could say we're in a unique era for this discussion.
Yeah, and that was the point that, to bring it back to the start, I think that was the point that Vinny Appice, longtime veteran of all this stuff, was making. He said, I don't think anyone thought this music was going to last this long. So
absolutely.
All right. Well, this has been a great conversation as always. And we don't know.
Thank you so much, Mark.
We don't know.